The envelope hit the concrete floor of the garage before Daniel Osei even finished reading it. Eviction, 30 days. He stood there with grease on his hands and a letter from the bank in his fingers, and 11 years of his life staring back at him from every corner of that shop. The lifts he'd paid off one installment at a time. The tool chest his late wife Sandra had helped him pick out the year they opened. The framed photo on the wall of him and 6-year-old Amara, both of them grinning under the shop sign the day it opened, both of them covered in paint. He picked the envelope up off the floor, folded it, put it in his back pocket. Then he went back to work. That was a Tuesday. If you are new here, this channel exists for stories exactly like this one, stories about people who had every reason to quit and didn't. Subscribe right now and hit the bell so you never miss what we put out. Now let's get back to Daniel. Precision Motors had been on Kingsway Avenue for 11 years. Daniel Osei had built it from a single-bay rental and a second-hand diagnostic machine into the most trusted independent auto shop in the district. He was Ghanaian-American, 43 years old, with a mechanic's hands and an engineer's mind. His father had fixed cars in Accra. His grandfather before that. The knowledge ran in him like a river, deep and fast, and not always visible from the surface. His daughter Amara was 9 years old. She had her mother's eyes, large, dark and patient, and her father's stubbornness, which was considerable. Every day after school she came straight to the shop. She had her own stool, her own drawer in the filing cabinet where she kept her homework and her library books, and currently a half-finished drawing of a Formula One car that she was designing from scratch because, she had informed Daniel, the current ones were not aerodynamically optimal. She was 9. She sat on that stool the Tuesday evening Daniel received the eviction notice, doing long division in her notebook, and she looked up once when he came back inside, and she looked at his face, and she looked back down at her notebook. "Dad," she said. "I know," he said. That was all either of them said about it that night. The car arrived on a Wednesday. It came on a flatbed, which was the first sign that something interesting was about to happen, because you didn't put a car on a flatbed unless it had defeated someone. The car was a 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429, one of the rarest production Mustangs ever built, midnight black, wide as a promise, with the kind of presence that made everyone in the shop stop what they were doing and look. The man who arrived with it was Richard Holt. Everyone in the city knew Richard Holt. He was 56 years old, white, silver-haired, with the particular posture of a man who had not been told no in a very long time. He had made his money in commercial real estate and then doubled it in private equity and then built a reputation as the kind of man who collected things, companies, properties, cars, and disposed of them when they stopped performing. He stepped out of his chauffeured Range Rover and walked toward the flatbed without looking at Daniel. "You the mechanic," he said. "I'm the owner," Daniel said. Holt looked at him then, a brief assessment. "The car has been to 4 shops. None of them could fix it. My estate manager found your name on an automotive forum. Someone said you were good with classics." He paused. "I'm not convinced this place is what I'm looking for, but here we are." Daniel looked at the Mustang on the flatbed. He didn't look at Holt. "What's wrong with it?" he said. "It won't start. When it does start, it runs for approximately 90 seconds and dies. 3 shops replaced the carburetor. 1 replaced the entire fuel system. None of it worked. The car has been sitting in my climate-controlled garage for 8 months." Daniel walked to the flatbed and stood looking at the Mustang for a long moment without touching it, the way a surgeon looks at a patient before the first incision. "Leave it," he said. "I'll call you." Holt's jaw tightened. "I'll need a timeline." "When I know something, you'll know something," Daniel said. "That's the timeline." Nobody talked to Richard Holt that way. His assistant, a young woman standing 3 feet behind him with a phone in each hand, visibly held her breath. Holt looked at Daniel for a long moment. Then he said, "Fine," and got back in the Range Rover. As the car pulled away, Amara appeared in the garage doorway, arms crossed, library book tucked under one elbow, watching the Range Rover leave. "Who was that?" she said. "Richard Holt," Daniel said. Amara's eyes went wide for exactly 1 second. Then she went back inside and picked up her pencil. If this story is already pulling you in, do me a favor, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second and it helps more people find stories like this one. Keep watching. Daniel spent the first evening just listening to the Mustang. He didn't open the hood. He didn't connect the diagnostic machine. He sat in the driver's seat with the door open and turned the key and listened to what the engine said when it tried to wake up, and then he listened to what it said when it died. He did this 6 times. He made notes on a yellow legal pad in the small, precise handwriting he'd had since secondary school in Kumasi. Amara brought him groundnut soup in a flask at 7 in the evening, which was what her mother used to do when Daniel worked late, and which Amara had started doing without being asked the year after Sandra died. "You didn't eat lunch," Amara said. "I'll eat now," Daniel said. "You say that and then you forget," she said. She sat down on her stool and opened her book and watched him over the top of it to make sure he actually ate. He ate. The problem, Daniel suspected by the end of the first night, was not mechanical. Every shop before him had treated it as a mechanical problem. Replace the carburetor, replace the fuel pump, replace the filter, and every shop before him had been wrong. The Boss 429 was an engineering marvel, but it was also a car with particular opinions about how it wanted to be treated. And someone, somewhere in its 50-year history, had made a modification to the ignition timing that interacted badly with the fuel delivery system in a way that only manifested under specific temperature and pressure conditions. It was, in the language of diagnostics, extraordinarily subtle. And it was exactly the kind of problem Daniel Osei was made for. He called 2 people. One was a restoration specialist in Detroit who had worked on Boss 429s for 30 years. The other was a vintage Ford engineer who had retired to Portugal and whom Daniel had helped remotely on a case 3 years earlier. He was on the phone until 2 in the morning. Amara had fallen asleep on her stool at some point, her cheek resting on her library book. Daniel carried her to the small office couch at the back of the shop, covered her with the blanket he kept there, and went back to work. By Thursday afternoon, he had a theory. By Friday evening, he had a solution. He rebuilt the ignition timing from scratch, cross-referencing the original factory spec against the modification that had been made and building a hybrid calibration that satisfied both. It was not a thing you could buy. It was not a thing you could Google. It was a thing you understood after decades of listening to engines the way other people listen to music, for the note that was wrong, the beat that was off, the silence that shouldn't be there. He called Richard Holt's assistant on Saturday morning. Holt arrived Sunday afternoon. He was alone this time, no assistant, no Range Rover. He drove himself in a silver Porsche, which told Daniel more about the man than any conversation had. He walked straight to the Mustang and stood in front of it. "Start it," he said. Daniel started it. The Boss 429 woke up like something that had been waiting, a deep, authoritative rumble that filled the entire garage and vibrated in the chest, and said plainly that it had always been capable of this, and it was not going to apologize for the delay. It idled smooth and strong, and it did not die. Amara looked up from her stool. Holt stared at the car for a long time. "Drive it," he said. Daniel drove it out of the lot and down Kingsway Avenue and onto the highway and pushed it through every gear, and every gear was clean, and the car ran the way it was built to run, furious and precise and completely in control. When he came back, he pulled into the lot and stepped out and handed Holt the key. Holt took the key. He held it in his palm for a moment, then he looked at Daniel. "What did they miss?" he said. Daniel explained it. He kept it short, the timing modification, the interaction, the calibration rebuild. Holt listened with the focused attention of someone who actually understood complexity. When Daniel finished, Holt said, 4 shops, months of work, and you fixed it in 4 days. 5, Daniel said. I take Saturdays slow. Something moved in Holt's expression, not quite a smile. What do I owe you? Daniel handed him the invoice. Holt looked at it. He was quiet for a moment, then he looked up. This is less than what the other shops charged, he said. They didn't fix it, Daniel said. I did. That's what the work is worth. Holt studied him. You know who I am. I know who you are. Then you know I could have made this worth considerably more for you if you'd priced accordingly. I priced according to the work, Daniel said, not according to who's paying. Richard Holt looked at Daniel Osei for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a card and held it out. I have a collection, he said, 14 vehicles. My regular restoration shop retired last year and I haven't found a replacement I trust. Call that number Monday. Daniel took the card. Holt turned to leave. He was almost at the Porsche when a voice stopped him. Mr. Holt. It was Amara. She had climbed down from her stool and was standing in the middle of the garage floor, her library book under her arm, her dark eyes steady on the Billionaire. Holt turned around. My dad is the best mechanic in the city, Amara said. You should tell people that. Holt looked at the 9-year-old girl standing in the middle of the oil-stained floor of a garage that had 30 days left on its lease, speaking to him like she was the one with the net worth. Is that so? He said. Yes, Amara said, because it's true. Holt looked at Daniel. Daniel said nothing. He had learned a long time ago not to interrupt his daughter when she was right. Holt looked back at Amara. He reached into his jacket again, different pocket this time, and produced a second card. That one, he said, handing it to Amara directly, is my personal line. If your father ever needs anything that the business card can't solve, you use that one. Amara took it. She looked at it. She looked at him. He needs the building, she said. The bank is taking it. The garage went very quiet. Daniel closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Holt looked at Amara, then he looked at Daniel. The bank. We received a notice, Daniel said quietly. It's being handled. How much? Holt said. Mr. Holt, how much is the outstanding amount? Daniel told him. Holt nodded once slowly. He looked at Amara. How old are you? 9, she said, but that's not relevant. Holt made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something closer to wonder. He put the Porsche key in the ignition and looked back at Daniel through the open window. Expect a call Monday, he said, from my office and from my bank. He drove away. Don't go anywhere. This story is about to turn in a way you are not ready for. Subscribe to this channel before you forget. Every week we put out stories that hit like this one. Now stay with me. The call came Monday at 8:47 in the morning. It was not from Holt's assistant. It was from Holt himself. I spoke to First Meridian this morning, Holt said, without preamble. Your outstanding loan balance will be cleared by end of business today. The title to the building will transfer to you directly. Consider it payment for services rendered. Daniel sat down on the floor of the garage, not on a stool, on the floor. Mr. Holt, he said, I can't accept. You fixed something 4 other shops couldn't fix, Holt said, and your daughter told me the truth when she didn't have to. I don't know many adults who would have done either. I'm not interested in your objection. Is there anything else you need? Daniel looked around the garage, the lifts, the tool chest, the framed photo on the wall. No, he said. No, that's no. Good, Holt said. My fleet manager will call this afternoon about the collection contract. The line went dead. Daniel sat on the floor of his garage for 4 minutes without moving. Then he called Amara's school and asked if she could be picked up early. When she climbed into the truck, she looked at him immediately. She read his face in one glance. She had been doing this since she was 4 years old, the same way Sandra used to, and it still caught him off guard sometimes how complete that inheritance was. What happened? She said. He cleared the loan, Daniel said. He's giving us the building. Amara was quiet for a moment. I knew he would, she said. You knew, Daniel said. He kept his first promise, she said. He said he'd call Monday. He called Monday. People who keep small promises keep big ones. Daniel turned onto Kingsway Avenue. The shop came into view, the sign, the parking lot, the bay doors. You told a billionaire our private business, he said. I told him the truth, Amara said. That's different. He didn't have an answer for that. He pulled into the lot and sat there with the engine running and looked at the building that was now going to be his, fully, permanently. We should fix the sign, he said. The P had been flickering for 6 months. Amara looked at the sign, then she looked at him. Can I help, she said. Yeah, he said, you can help. But that wasn't the turn. That wasn't the thing that changed everything. The turn came on Wednesday. Holt's fleet manager, a precise Trinidadian British woman named Celeste Morgan, arrived at 9 in the morning with a folder containing the service history of 14 vehicles, 6 classics, 4 luxury imports, 4 performance modern cars. She walked through the garage with Daniel for 2 hours, asking exactly the right questions. By noon, they had agreed on a 12-month service contract. The annual value was more than Daniel had made in any 2 years combined since opening the shop. He didn't tell Amara that part immediately. He waited until she came in after school, dropped her backpack on the floor, climbed onto her stool, and opened her notebook. He waited until she was settled. Then he told her. She looked at her notebook for a moment, then she looked at him. That's because you're the best, she said simply, and went back to her long division. But Wednesday was also the day the Mustang's story got out. Holt had mentioned Daniel in a private conversation with 3 other collectors, men who moved in the same circles, who owned the same kind of cars, who had the same problem of finding someone who actually understood what they had. One of those collectors had mentioned it to a journalist who covered the classic car world for a regional luxury magazine. The journalist had reached out to Holt for comment. Holt had not said no comment. He had said, and Daniel would later read this in print and have to sit down, the best diagnostic mind I've encountered in 20 years of collecting works out of a shop on Kingsway Avenue. If you own something irreplaceable, stop taking it to places with glossy waiting rooms. Find the person who actually understands the machine. The article went up Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, Daniel had 19 new inquiries. By Friday, he had 31. One of them was from a museum. A natural history and automotive heritage museum in the region had a 1937 Cord 812 supercharged, one of the most beautiful American cars ever made that had not run in 40 years and that 3 restoration specialists had declined to attempt. They had read the article. They wanted to know if Daniel would look at it. He said yes before he finished reading the email. But here is where the story turned in a direction that nobody, not Daniel, not Amara, not Richard Holt, saw coming. On Friday evening, as Daniel was locking up, a black town car pulled into the lot. A woman stepped out, 60 black silver locks, a charcoal trouser suit, the posture of someone who ran things. Her name was Dr. Yvonne Asant-Bridges. She was a private collector and a retired automotive engineer who had spent 20 years at a major European manufacturer and who now, in her retirement, hunted significant American classic cars the way other people hunted art. She had flown in from Atlanta that morning. In the back of her town car was a folder. Inside the folder was a provenance document for the 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429 that Richard Holt had brought in for repairs the previous week. Dr. Asant-Bridges spread the folder on Daniel's workbench and walked him through it quietly and methodically, the way a person presents something they have been researching for a very long time. The car, it turned out, was not merely a Boss 429. It was a documented, verified 1 of 4 prototype variant, a pre-production test car that had been used by Ford's racing division in 1969, then sold into private hands and lost to history for decades. The modification to the ignition timing that every other mechanic had misunderstood and failed to fix was not a modification at all. It was an original factory racing calibration, a feature, not a flaw that only existed on these 4 cars. There were currently 2 known surviving examples. Both were in museums. The car that Richard Holt believed was a well-preserved classic, the car he had valued at somewhere between $40,000 and $80,000, was one of the rarest Ford Mustangs in existence. Its current auction estimate, based on the provenance documentation and recent comparable sales, was between $6 and $9 million. Daniel looked at Dr. Asantbridges for a long time. "Holt doesn't know," he said. "Holt doesn't know," she confirmed. "He purchased it at a private sale 12 years ago. The provenance documentation was separated from the car at some point and has been in a private archive. I've spent 4 years tracing it." "You want to buy it?" Daniel said. "I want to make an offer," she said, "but I can't approach Holt directly. We have a history that makes that conversation complicated. I was hoping you might be willing to facilitate an introduction. In exchange for your time, I'm prepared to offer you a finder's fee of $200,000. Daniel sat down on his stool. He thought about the eviction notice that had hit the concrete floor 6 days ago. He thought about Amara asleep on the office couch with her cheek on her library book. He thought about the framed photo on the wall and the sign with the flickering P and the tool chest Sandra had helped him pick out. Then he thought about Richard Holt, who had cleared his loan without being asked and given him a building, and called him personally at 8:47 on a Monday morning. He picked up his phone and called Holt. It rang twice. "Osei," Holt said. "I have something you need to hear," Daniel said. "In person, tonight if possible." There was a pause. "I'll be there in 40 minutes. He was there in 35. Daniel introduced Dr. Asantbridges. He stepped back and let her present the folder. He watched Richard Holt's face as a man who thought he owned a very good car learned that he owned a piece of automotive history. Holt was quiet for a long time after she finished. Then he looked at Daniel. "You could have let me find this out on my own, or not at all." "You were straight with me," Daniel said. "I'm straight with you." Holt looked at the provenance documents. He looked at Dr. Asantbridges. "You want to buy it?" "Yes," she said. "What's your offer?" $7.5 million, she said, "which is the lower end of the estimate, but it is a clean, private sale with no auction house fees and no public exposure." Holt looked at the folder again. He was silent for what felt like a very long time. Then he looked at Daniel. "You knew what this was worth when you fixed it," Holt said. "It was not quite a question." "I knew something was unusual about the calibration," Daniel said. "I didn't know the provenance." "But you called me anyway, the moment you found out." "Yes." Holt nodded. He looked at Dr. Asantbridges. 7.5. "I'll have my lawyer draw the paperwork by Monday." Dr. Asantbridges extended her hand. They shook. Then Holt turned back to Daniel. "The finder's fee she offered you." Daniel said nothing. "Double it," Holt said, "from me for the phone call." Daniel opened his mouth. "Don't argue with me, Os." He didn't argue. Amara had been on her stool the whole time, library book open, not reading a single word of it. When Dr. Asantbridges and her town car were gone and the lot was quiet, and Holt was shaking Daniel's hand at the door, Amara climbed down from her stool and walked over. Holt looked down at her. "You were right," he said. "He's the best mechanic in the city." "I know," Amara said. "I told you." Holt laughed, the same real, surprised laugh that very few people ever heard from him. He reached into his jacket and took out an envelope and held it out to Amara. She looked at it. She didn't take it immediately. "What is it?" "A college fund," Holt said, "from one person who recognizes talent to another." Amara looked at her father. Daniel nodded once. She took the envelope. "Thank you," she said. She paused. You should also fix your fleet contract. Celeste Morgan is good, but she's undervaluing 3 of your restoration vehicles. I can show you the comparables if you want." Holt stared at her. "She's 9, Daniel said, by way of explanation. "I'm aware," Holt said. He looked at Amara. "Send me the comparables." "I don't have email," Amara said. "I'll tell my dad and he'll send them." Holt shook his head slowly. He walked to his Porsche and stopped with his hand on the door. "Osei," he said. "Yes, sir. 7 days ago I brought you a car I thought was worthless." He looked at the shop, the sign, the bay doors, the cracked lot. "You fixed it. Your daughter told the truth. And tonight you called me when you didn't have to." He paused. "There are not many people like that." He got in the Porsche and drove away. Daniel and Amara stood in the lot and watched the taillights disappear. Then Amara looked up at the sign with the flickering P. "Dad," she said. "Yeah. When we fix the sign, can we make it bigger?" He looked at her, he looked at the sign, he looked at the building that was now entirely and permanently his. "Yeah," he said, "we can make it bigger." She nodded, satisfied, and went back inside to finish her long division. If this story found something in you tonight, drop a comment below and tell us what part hit the hardest. Was it Amara? Was it the phone call Daniel didn't have to make? Tell us. And if you're not subscribed yet, do it right now. This channel is built for people who believe that integrity and excellence always find their moment. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. We'll see you in the next one. The sign on Kingsway Avenue was repainted the following Saturday. Bigger letters. A new bulb in the P. Amara held the brush for the A, the first letter of her name, hidden inside her father's work, exactly where she had always been. It said Precision, MOTORS, in clean white letters, and every single person who drove past it that weekend had no idea that the building behind it had changed hands twice in 7 days, or that a 9-year-old girl had been at the center of all of it, or that somewhere in a climate-controlled facility, a midnight black 1969 Ford Mustang Boss 429 was being prepared for the most significant private automotive sale of the year. They just saw a shop, a good one by the look of it, the kind that had been there a long time and planned to stay. They were right.